I've lived 1,000 lives. I've piloted 1,000 souls. I've killed and fought at night just for another role.
This is the Happy Jacks RPG podcast, a roundtable discussion that's a mix of friendship, humor, unbridled enthusiasm, and tabletop RPG topics sent in from around the world.
Just for another role.
Welcome to season 31, episode 8 of the Happy Jacks RPG podcast. My name is Kimmy,
My name is Adam.
and we are here today, very close to Christmas.
Very close.
Very close.
So close.
So close. And in today's episode, Steve in SoCal asks about gender roles in fictional species and societies. Sean from Washington, D.C. asks if there is a universal way to learn to GM. And Rose asks if we have a white whale system that we've always wanted to try. And if you'd like to contribute a question or topic to the show, you can email us at happyjacksrpg@gmail.com. That's happyjacksrpg@gmail.com. And for December, we have our Indie Designer of the Month, which is Newer Rose, the owner of Monkey's Paw Games. She's a Black, queer, trans, neurodivergent designer, and her work can be found at monkeyspawgames.com, along with an amazing collection of other indie games that she kind of sells for other people. The game we're going to feature this week is called Chainmail, and it is designed to be played through the written mail. However, you can also, it would translate well to email and probably play by post and things like that too. And it is a lightweight D20 and D6 system where you want to roll under a TN for stamina, skill, or luck. One person is the chronicler and controls the worlds and all the perils in it. And the others choose from 36 different character backgrounds. And the character backgrounds are actually very funny, and honestly, could be great for inspiring character concepts in other games, or good to print out as a GM, because there's just a little blurb paragraph about each one that could be really useful if you wanted to make NPCs on the fly or something like that. Yeah. So they're very cool. They were also very witty and low key, or not so low key, roasting different tropes.
Yeah.
One of them is the Moral Crusader, where it's there's a little bit of demon in every young adult book, and maybe they're not thinking of the children, but you are, and stuff like that. So it's very, it's very good and very on the nose. It's
Nice.
I get it. Okay, cool. That's good. I get it. I see what you mean. So check that out at monkeyspawgames.com. There's an itch.io shop, a bunch of cool stuff, and they are fantastic. And we're coming up on January. We have another designer. It'd be very cool.
Yeah. Are they already lined up?
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yay. Very cool.
All right.
This has been a lot of fun.
It is. Yeah. It's nice to see every month, and it's really fun to spend time going through people's catalogs of games they've created and really diving in and being, oh, what's that one? Oh, what's that one? Because some of them we all have one or two games that we're kind of known for.
Right.
But really diving in and seeing how many different games a lot of people have designed is a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times when indie game designers come out with their first game that really hits it big, people don't realize that they wrote a whole lot of games to get to the point where they got that one.
Yeah, for the most part, absolutely. And a lot of them did adventures for years before they ever tried designing a game of their own.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely.
All right. Would you like to read our first email?
I would. Oh, wise and inclusive jackers of happiness. Well, that sounds a little dirty. As a community which values inclusiveness and care around sensitive and problematic subjects, I'm curious about when you explore sometimes problematic subjects via gaming. In this case, I'm going to treat pre-game conversations as already addressed, but please feel free to take a moment to discuss safety tools such as lines and veils, X-Card, and others. Instead, I'd like to focus on some of the topics which I've come across as interesting to explore and would be interested in hearing your thoughts on some that you have. One example that I've been interested to explore is the different gendered Aslan languages in Traveler. For those unfamiliar, my loose understanding is that the Aslan, space lions, have different languages between their male and female casts, which tie back to traditional gender roles where one is a more technical language while the other is more focused on hunter-warrior assumptions. I think an example was brought up years ago by Bill, where a fun quirk of a starship might be that you had to work around odd linguistic assumptions related to this kind of thing, i.e. the button for attack might be labeled pounce and the stealth functions might be stalk, but then when you get to the actual code of the system, it's following a different logic. While I find this to be an interesting logical exercise, I recognize that this may open some potentially contentious discussions around gender roles, societal oppression, etc. Another example along similar lines, albeit in visual media instead of gaming, is that most of the current House of Dragons series seems to be an examination of the plight of noble women in medieval society. While I'm perfectly fine with making most games of D&D or equivalent in a more ideal and egalitarian world where that struggle isn't highlighted, I feel like this could be a valid struggle to address in some instances. While the recent Erica Odd horror story was abhorrent and done very poorly by the GM, I can envision a more thoughtful game where perhaps the player's patron is a noble daughter fighting to ensure the legitimacy of her claim to a typically patriarchal throne, or the player's helping or hindering some NPC's political marriage plans. A different example which has been raised is the problematic history of the half-orc.
Yeah.
Yet, I'm not proposing poking those beasts as a regular feature of games, but are there examples of similar topics that you feel have been addressed well in your gaming experience and or examples that have gone poorly? I never intend to be a tourist in someone else's struggles, but also don't want to exclude all potentially sensitive topics, especially since some are both interesting to consider and potential opportunities for us to all grow in our understanding. Thoughtfully yours, Steve in SoCal.
Oh, wow.
It's a really good topic.
It is a
actually.
really good topic. I think this is a great example from Traveler, the Aslan. I've never actually had one of these in one of the Traveler games that I've played. I think maybe we had one time, but they weren't like a big NPC or anything. Something to keep in mind with that specific example is Traveler's kind of an old system.
Right. Yeah.
So there are a lot of these things that kind of were designed before, especially the gaming community became more aware of, different identities and things like that. And it's definitely always good to kind of reflect on it. Now, I'm not super bothered by the Aslan one specifically because they're space lions.
Right. Yeah.
They are not they're not allegory. I mean, maybe they are. I don't know enough about them specifically, but they're not a veiled reference to actual human societies or cultures or things like that. It's space lions.
Right.
They hunt people because they are lions in space.
Right.
So there's not I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe if you dig into them, maybe that they have been used
I'm
people
sure.
of color
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
But maybe they're just lions in space.
Yeah. Right.
So it's kind of interesting to break that down because I think it is interesting when you consider the roles of different animals.
Yeah.
Because in science in the world, lots of different animals have a myriad of genders and transitions and things like that. But they also have very rigid roles for different genders. So while you are female, you have a certain coloration for very specific reasons, because they don't want you to be flashy and they want you to sit on the eggs and raise the young or whatever like that.
Yeah.
Well, the male is very,
Attract the
flamboyant
attention.
and bright colored so that they can attract. So there are very rigid, roles for different genders in
a lot of biology.
Yeah, and a lot of biology too. So I think that's an interesting concept to play on.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things I don't really know the Aslan and I haven't read those parts of Traveler, but I am more comforted by the fact that it's separating between the technical skills and the hunter skills.
Yeah.
Which, I assume the hunter warriors are the female characters. because
That's how it is in Lion
right, in
Society.
Lion Society, yeah. So
I
and
bet you $1 million it's backwards.
it's probably backwards, just like all the alpha males think like alpha wolves are like badasses.
Yeah.
You
Oh my God.
know,
I
right?
would love that. A Lion Space Society where it's like all the badass buff lionesses.
Right? Yeah.
And like all the
There's,
like
all
nerdy
these
little
nerd-
lions with like their manes and like their
Right?
pocket
Yeah.
protectors, like doing coding.
Right. Oh my God.
I love it so much.
Right. Oh, I hope that's how it is. Somebody.
I have to go Google
yeah.
this at some point.
Right? Yeah, we're gonna have to look into this. Further study required.
Yeah.
But yeah, and but I think there are, I think like you were talking about with the roles. What are the roles that are happening here? Because the temptation, I think, is to we're going to explore gender bias in our stories,
Mhm.
right? So women are oppressed,
Mhm.
and
What?
yeah.
We are?
What? Yeah. Yeah. And and it's like, well, let's recreate this typical like Western society, Western human society where women are oppressed and forced into homemaking and treated as property, etc., and men are the warriors and the leaders and and do all the things. And which is you're not breaking any ground there. You're not gonna break any ground there. You're either confirming bias of mostly men who already have that ingrained gender discrimination, or you're confirming the bias of people who are actively playing against that as a way to play against it and fight it, right? So like if you want to, like in this example of, like a noble daughter fighting for her claim to the title, there's such a that's not a you're not going to break any ground with that story. Nobody's going to learn anything new because either everybody thinks that this was okay and it's not something we need to worry about, or everybody thinks that this is not okay and we're all going to come up with the story together that proves how it's not okay, right? So it's just not a very challenging thought experiment. More challenging thought experiments would be to break up roles that are in ways that are different from how our American modern society thinks of it, or even how Western European history has thought about it.
Yeah.
And that's why I think like the women as the warriors and the men as the technical people. That's an interesting way to explore gender differences.
Yeah, absolutely. And like flipping it on its head and then you're actually exploring it. You're not just like exploiting it.
Right.
Because the inevitable thing that generally tends to happen with these like quote women empowerment stories where there's like the daughter of a nobleman that is the in charge of the party. Yeah, except the party's going out and doing all this stuff for her.
Right.
So it ends up being, unless you are working really hard at it, it ends up being kind of like the princess in a tower where she sends you out to do a thing and you do it for her because you're her heroes.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's not really empowering.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the story is still just happening to her.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe she has some agency in the fact that she's taking specific actions for her own interests, but you're not, like I said, you're not challenging any real concern or any. You're not challenging any preconceived notions of gender roles.
Right, exactly.
So,
and I mean there were a ton of criticisms of House of Dragon, and the way they've been treating the women characters, and the way George R. Martin always treats his women characters. But it's like it was very upsetting to see. Like I had no interest in watching the show. Especially after how Game of Thrones ended.
Right.
But like just hearing it and having gone, given birth since, the last Game of Thrones aired and stuff like that, there was so much trauma involved with, like maternal death and, and gruesome ways, like the most gruesome death, during a birth process that you could possibly have in multiple versions.
Yeah.
Like it happens to multiple women in the series, like in the one season.
Of course it does.
Yeah, and it's just like, and it's it's so frustrating
Yeah.
as a woman, because that's something that at no point it's hard to like really articulate, because in these stories, that's like the role of women in these
Yeah.
like pseudo, copied from, medieval fantasy stories. Um, it's like that's their job.
Right.
So while it's not usually used as like a cheap ploy to like pull on the emotions of the audience
Yeah.
and to cause drama and to be, oh, this awful thing, it's the worst thing you can think of, like there's just always this undercurrent of like a failure at the one
Yes.
thing you were supposed to do.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, so she's gone now. So, and then inevitably there's like a replacement. And
Right. Yeah.
it's more of a thing that happens to the male protagonists in the story than really being about the woman and or her child.
Exactly.
So, like, very rarely is it actually about the woman or the person who's giving birth. It's about how it affects the male characters around her, or how it affects the child, who will probably end up being a male character.
Right.
Oh, you lost your mom. So
Yeah.
that's like how we get
Right.
the audience to empathize with you.
Yeah.
And so it's just awful when something that's scary and people go through it all the time. Like it's a scary, traumatic thing to go through. And a lot of women have like very real trauma from giving birth. I was very lucky. I had a very good experience. But like having that used for like, I don't know, just as a tool for for a dramatic moment is just very frustrating and upsetting.
Yeah. It's like emotional sport. You know, it's like hunting for emotional sport.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
It's like I want to shoot a deer just to show how strong an orphan baby deer can be.
Right.
Or like
Well, and
Bambi and Dumbo both, like let's exploit the mother in order to create a story about the little boy.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah, and while that can be part of a person's story, like graphically, like it's incredibly graphic. Showing it in that way it just seems like a cheap like ratings grab or it's just ridiculous.
Yeah. It's kind of like I won't get off on a tangent, but it's like violence on The Boys. It's now to the point where they're being violent and showing gore just to be more shocking than the previous episodes, so that their ratings continue to climb.
Yeah,
and it's
still nowhere near The Boys comic.
Right, it's nowhere near. Yeah,
The Boys comic so bad.
Yeah,
Oh, good.
I think I think one of the places where you see.
Wait, I'm going to stop you for just a second. Just like you were talking about how Dumbo is like. Because we live in LA.
Yeah.
I gave birth at a hospital that's very near Disney Studios, and Disney like sponsored the maternity ward. Literally all over the wall, everything was Dumbo themed.
Oh no!
I was like walking. I was like, did nobody watch this movie?
Oh my god!
What is happening? Like it's like really pretty. It's like the actual original cells from the movie or whatever. So it's really pretty and nice, and you're just like
sweet.
little elephant with like a diaper on, and I'm just like, oh my god, honey, get me out of here.
Yeah.
Sam's like,
sorry.
Oh my god.
It's still one of the most traumatic scenes in all of film.
So upsetting. Yeah. Anyway.
So I was going to say one of the places I think where you see much better use of this kind of thing is in Star Trek. And Star Trek has a lot of not the original series.
No.
They didn't do such a great job, although they did for the time. They broke a lot of ground on dispelling, gender roles, racial roles, etc. But especially in some of the later series, they do a really good job of exploring these kinds of social issues, but in a way that forces you to re-examine them in new ways.
Yeah.
And they don't have to be the same. And like one of the things they did with childbirth was making a male character pregnant.
Like Deanna's like I was super pregnant. I was like 8.5 months pregnant, and I'm watching this episode, Deanna Troi giving birth in like 2 minutes painlessly.
Yeah.
But in like this weird futuristic metal
Right.
chair. I was like, they still haven't come up with a better way than just like
I know,
lay down
right?
and push.
I know, right? Yeah, yeah.
Like-
Can't you just transport it out?
I
Like,
know, that's what I was thinking. Like, I feel like they should have a better
Yeah.
solution at this point.
right?
Although it
So-
was like magic alien baby, so it was like,
right.
oh,
yeah.
I gave
yeah.
birth in like
Oh.
10 seconds, and it was
Right,
perfect.
yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
I
yeah.
feel a little bitter about this right now, but they did a
Right.
good job with it, yes. And
Yeah.
one of the
No.
things, like linking to what you were saying earlier, one of the
Mhm.
things they do is just have the assumption of this is how it is.
Right.
Like women are in command roles,
Yeah.
you know, people of color, all over the place, and
Mhm.
there's not by not making an issue of it,
Yeah.
and by having it as a universally accepted norm in the world, is often more powerful than playing out.
Right.
What a person of color can be like
What?
the number one, like that's amazing.
Right. Yeah.
Like by just having it as the norm, you help normalize it.
Yeah, yeah, just showing it, and so yeah. If you really want to explore these issues,
Mhm.
I think just well, if you want to explore these issues in a game, I think you need and you talked about, yes, of course you have those pregame discussions,
Mhm.
but everybody kind of should go in knowing like, hey, you know what, we're going to play with this issue,
Yeah.
and we did that recently with Hexbreakers, and dealing with trans issues, and Emily wanted to specifically do that,
Yeah.
and let's take this, let's parody this property that has become a symbol of anti-transness,
Yeah.
and let's play around that world and make it pro-trans.
Yeah.
And we all kind of knew that was one of the themes we were going to
yeah.
explore.
Yeah, and we
Yeah,
talked
yeah.
about it very specifically ahead of
Yeah.
time, and we wanted to make sure that everyone was comfortable with that, and
Yeah.
specifically Riley and Emily.
Right.
Since
yeah,
they've
yeah.
lived that as their truth,
Yes.
like having other people play with that, it takes a very safe table, a good,
Yeah.
a clear understanding, and
Yeah.
and safety tools for them to allow us in that story with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And not to center myself, but I felt like I grew a lot in terms of my own journey about gender identity.
Yeah.
And from that game,
Yeah.
it gave me a lot of insight into like, oh, these are some of the things revolved around gender that I have been holding on to that I don't need to hold on to anymore.
Yeah,
And it was
absolutely.
but that happened because we set out to tell that story.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so that's what I would say on this is like, don't fall into tropes of like, oh, we've got to explore this by doing what's already been done through history.
Yeah.
I think that's where you run into a trap. I think that's where George R. R. Martin does. I was sad to hear you say that Game of Thrones ended. I'm still waiting on season 5. I thought,
I know, right?
yeah, I just think they should have, like, season 4 was so good. They should have, like, kept going. Sorry. But no, but yeah, that's the trap you fall into if you just try to, like, let's play in the world that we already know.
Right.
Whether it's the actual world we already know or just based on the world we already know. You're not learning anything new.
Right. And it happens with a lot of authors, even who,
Yeah.
like, I honestly don't think George R. R. Martin gives a damn about his representation of women. Like, what's your first
Right.
clue?
Yeah. Right.
But I feel like there's a lot of authors out there who are trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And I don't want to, like, name and shame because I think they're
Yeah.
trying to do the right thing. But, like, they end up still writing in kind of a tropey way.
Yeah.
Or they write, this is the strong female character who's not the expected.
Uh-huh.
And it ends up being kind of like, okay, but now she's like the special exception.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Who then implies by her very existence that all other women are this other thing.
Right.
So it's just a really hard thing to play with without really, really thinking it through.
Yeah.
And when you have to kind of think about your group. If you're going to have everyone in your group play a woman
Mm-hmm.
or a trans person or something like that, like that could be a way to have everyone empowered.
Yeah.
And you don't even have to make it a thing where it's not expected that they can
Right.
do stuff.
Yeah.
Like have them
Yeah.
just put themselves in the role of those people doing cool, empowering things.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
like, don't even make it an issue. Like, oh, like these 4 women are traveling together. What?
Right? Yeah.
You know, this is a medieval society. You should be riding side saddle.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So it's like don't worry about making that part of the story. Now, there
Right.
are some games where that's very much a part of the story.
Yeah.
So like Night Witches is a really
I
great
was going to
example.
bring up Night Witches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Night Witches is about it actually a historical group of women that were part of the Russian army during World War II.
Mhm.
Or I guess Air Force, I guess.
Yeah.
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 So they were called the Night Witches, and they flew night missions that were incredibly deadly and
Mhm.
dangerous, and great, very, very effective. They were incredible fighter pilots, and gender is a very specific part of that game.
Yeah.
Exploring it, the actual challenges these women faced. It's one of the agenda items, or not agenda. It's one of the things that the GM is cued to do when they read the rule book.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, make gender a thing. Like these
Right. Yeah.
women of their time were breaking all these barriers and doing these amazing things.
Mm-hmm.
So by stepping into their shoes and embodying that, you are kind of acknowledging that, but it's designed for them to have pushback against that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're going to explore these themes, it's sometimes a good idea to go out and look for games that specifically do that.
Yeah, and the other one that I was going to mention, and I'm trying to look up the name of it now, but it's an Avery McDonald. Dream Askew.
Yeah.
Which is specifically queer focused,
Mhm.
and so it invites you to take queerness and the issues around that and play with that as part of your game. And I think that's what makes Night Witches so strong, a way to really examine gender roles,
Mhm.
because you're not saying like, oh, we have to go into this direction. Yeah,
Mhm.
but by sheer fact of being in that setting, there's you can't, when you're playing in that setting, you can't not address gender discrimination.
Right.
And
and by playing, you are already defying the gender.
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
you are
Yeah.
not, you're not expected to like save the princess in the tower
Right.
and make her feel empowered that way. It's like you are a already empowered woman
Yeah.
doing these badass things.
Yeah.
How does that affect you as a person?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're starting from a much like already like way above like zero,
Right,
with,
yeah.
with that examination.
Yeah.
Uh,
I would also mention a couple that are racially centered, like Coyote and Crow, which forces you to imagine a fantasy / sci-fi world where colonization of the North American continent or the American continents didn't happen.
Yeah.
And so, it does some really interesting things like just the maps show North at the bottom.
Mhm.
And things like that just like remind you like, hey, these things just didn't happen. Like, like a society that discovered gravity control in like the 1700s will not invent the wheel.
Mhm.
And just things like that and I just love just reading the setting materials, just kind of reframes the whole idea of what you think of as the past, the present, and the future, it from a different light. And so yeah, I think that's there are so many ways to explore social issues without just wallowing in the like patheticness of what has already happened.
Yeah,
right?
without starting
Yeah.
from a already negative place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that would be, and like we already kind
Yeah.
of talked about it. I just want to make sure we answered the actual question.
Yes, right? Yeah.
So,
I
but
think
yeah,
so
we
too.
talked about some of
yeah.
the gaming experiences, examples that have gone well and then
Yeah.
have gone poorly. I feel like we talked,
Okay.
like, there's so many examples.
Yeah.
Like,
There's
There's so many examples.
so many.
And, like, luckily we have a good gaming group, so, like, I
Right.
don't have a lot of personal examples from this gaming group.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's always, and especially
Yeah.
like at con games and stuff like this, is one of
Oh,
the
yeah.
reasons I started wanting to GM more at cons
Mhm.
rather than signing up for games with people I didn't know.
Yeah.
Because it's always like you set them out and it's like the pre-made PCs and there's like the one woman character.
Yeah. Just
And-
the one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just the one, and everyone expects you to play that one.
Yeah. Right.
And like oh man,
Yeah.
if you reach for any other character, you get dirty looks.
Yeah. Like
I'm not gonna be the
here,
woman
here
character.
I got a woman character for you. Here you go.
Yeah,
You know,
and then it's like, well, if you play that one, I have to play the woman character.
right, yeah.
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 You might learn something.
Amazing.
Right?
Yeah, but it's almost
Yeah.
not worth it because then they do the whole like,
Oh my
they try and they roll.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
They just start wallowing in like all the tropes of
Yeah.
women, and you're just like,
Yeah.
I can't.
Look,
I don't want to.
if there are any unenlightened, awkward cis male boys out there who are, who are tempted to do so, don't play a slut if you get the woman character. Just don't do it. It's not pretty. It's not funny.
It's not
Nobody is gonna
empowering.
like it. It's
Yeah.
not empowering. It's just don't do it. Just remember me saying this to you.
Yeah.
Don't.
Yeah.
Stop that urge before it happens.
Yeah, and like clarifying, like women can totally be as slutty
Yeah,
as they want.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go. You enjoy it. Men playing women
Being slutty.
being
yeah,
slutty
it's-
is different.
Yeah,
And it's just different.
Yeah. There's a DS9 episode about that too, and it does not hold up. Just FYI.
No, yeah.
Um,
But a couple of them don't.
yeah, a couple of them don't. Yeah.
You're like, oh, I see what they were going for
Yeah.
in the 90s.
Ooh, yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I'm doing my every other year DS9 rewatch right now,
Ah.
and so I'm just starting the first season. So it's interesting because it's a whole new. I don't know. It's just been. I actually skipped a couple of years ago, so it's been about 4 years since I've watched them, and now we've had like Strange New Worlds and other things, and so I'm seeing things in a very different light.
Interesting.
But it's interesting how what has held up has really surprised me.
Oh, that's cool.
So yeah, there's some really cool things in it. But
Nice.
yeah. But,
Yeah, I really, really loved DS9.
Yeah.
I don't know, like that was only I guess 2 years
Yeah.
ago that I watched it. But,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
so
I still maintain it. It holds up better than most of them, but it's definitely got its '90s traps,
Yeah.
and especially with gender roles, and sexism and homophobia and all that. So,
yeah.
one of the things. Last thing
Mhm.
I'd say about this is one of the sort of horrors that I've had as a queer gamer has been, a couple of different times in my life. People from a regular gaming group have said like, Adam, why don't you try playing a straight character once in a while? And and I've literally had people say that to me, and I'm like, and at the time I was like, yeah, I should like branch out, and but what I would say to them now is, okay, as soon as you get all the straight players to play a gay character,
Yeah.
because I don't even get NPCs to flirt with in your games, and
Yeah.
so I would say the same thing on a lot of these social issues. If you have somebody in your group that is affected by these social issues, you need to really listen to them, and before you go charging in thinking you're here to help them expand their horizons.
Mm-hmm.
So and especially like if you have women in your group, maybe spend some time listening to them.
Mhm.
So because they'll probably have plenty to tell you about how this can go poorly.
Yes.
That's it. Yeah. Anyway, great question. I really like that.
Yeah.
I could go on for several more days.
And something
about
that's
that.
really common, especially in like
Yeah.
fantasy.
Yeah.
So it's so relevant.
And also, okay, just one last thing. Who I am. I would also just applaud those who do consider this and think about this. Like, this is what you should be doing is, well, in my opinion, like look at your assumptions and see if you can use gaming to expand your horizons, change your worldview, improve your character. Like that's a great goal. Just
Flip
do
it on its head.
flip it on its head.
Do it the
Yeah.
other way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Mailbag number 2. Listener's log. Stardate 100472.13. I received a distress call sent by Captain Kimmy of the USS Happy Jacks asking for emails. It echoed several times across my Spotify and YouTube subspace channels. I'm reminded of the rules of acquisition 208. Sometimes the only thing more dangerous than a question is an answer. Nevertheless, when Captain Kimmy calls, we must answer. One might go so far as to say resistance is futile. So let's carry on with the mission, to explore strange new RPGs, to seek out new players and new games, and to boldly go where no person has gone before, and see if Teacher Mode Kimmy is bothered by split inflatives. Oh, yeah. Split infinitive. Sorry, didn't enunciate very well. I will allow it.
Yeah.
That was good enough.
That
I'll
was so
allow
good.
it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hello, Kimmy, crew, and jackers around the Alpha Quadrant. Forgive me, but sometimes you just need to get a bit of geekery out of your system.
Yep.
I thought a bit of Trek might help the recent Tolkien wave. Break the recent Tolkien wave. There's been a lot of it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's all on me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I
Although I
understand.
do love some Middle Earth goodness. A chat in Discord's tabletop RPG channel motivates today's email. Depending on when this gets read, these Discord posts started on November 15th. We actually have enough emails to have like a few weeks of a little bit of breathing
yay.
space. It's
Yeah.
very exciting now.
Great.
Keep them coming. Keep them.
Yes.
Toby asked for video suggestions and on learning to be a GM, which kicked off high engagement videos and larger ideas about preparing new GMs. While the main topic was about how to be a GM, it started spinning my wheels, on the concept of a universal way to learn to be a GM. Since this show does an amazing job guiding GMs old and new, I thought this topic was perfect for you. I'm skeptical that a universal way to learn to be a GM exists. Maybe universal isn't a great term here, so maybe you can help me work on that too. Here's what I've got so far. On one hand, there are probably many things that can help prep and train new GMs, and these things can likely transfer across different games of different and types of different players. Much of this advice show does exactly that. Thus, we could have a collection of reading materials, videos, podcasts, and the like, which offer guidance on how to be a GM. Heck, there's even a YouTube channel and a Discord community called How to Be a Great GM. Tangent, guy who runs this channel has some interesting content, but your mileage may vary. If we follow this wormhole pathway, we will need to get... all we need to do is digest this content, and we'd have a good GM foundation to put into practice. This sounds like the original intent of the Discord posts. Of course, to be universally applicable for all GMs, I think it would have to be largely game, system, and player and group agnostic. On the other hand, I think the increasing agnosticism doesn't translate well to teaching or mentoring new GMs broadly. GMs are also gamers with their own idiosyncrasies and preferences that can hinder such translational GMing across games and tables. Also, the vast range of games we could GM mean that we'd have to learn how to engage with those systems and game types, and that learning processes could look different, especially across our personal differences. Even having terms like trad, OSR, narrative, or storytelling imply non-trivial differences in cultures of play for GMs to learn about and consider. One GM might transition seamlessly running masks at a convention to a role-playing event for a Pathfinder campaign. Well, not so much for another GM because of the individual preferences and not for lack of any how-to GM materials. Some of this could be distilled to the GMs learning enough about a game to see if it resonates with them and want to run it, as well as jumping on the holodeck, deep end, loving this, and trying it out. But I think that gets ahead of ourselves, and we're thinking of broad, universal training for new GMs. We could also say that GMs could be informed by being a player first, which is likely to happen in many cases. Yet, we could still have a group of people entirely new to RPGs where one of them volunteers to GM and could use these resources. So, after all that rambling, what are your thoughts on ways to create a how-to GM guide or repository of guides? Could it really be done in a universal way, or is there enough tension from things like individual GM preference and game difference to confound it all? Or are we doomed to create catalogs of guides from the general basics to specific topics and cross-reference by game types related tags? Perhaps Scotty has some applicable wisdom in Star Trek 3. The more they overthink the plumbing, the easier it is to stop up the drain.
Yeah, doctor. From one surgeon to another.
May your dice every stork, because that's how the best memories are made. Sean from just outside Washington, D.C. Are you Jedi in the Discord? P.S. Lightning rounds. What is one fantasy or sci-fi franchise that you'd love to be created or rebooted that hasn't yet been created or rebooted?
Oh, the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon.
Oh, yeah.
I would love to see an updated version of that.
Yeah, I hear there's like a lot of like Easter eggs about that in the D&D movie that's coming out.
Oh, really?
With Chris
Oh,
Pine, but
that'd
I
be
don't
cool.
know
Yeah.
100% for sure.
Yeah.
Would you love to
What
be
about you?
created or rebooted? I've been on a Babylon 5. Like I just love it since I watched it. Also when I was preparing to write Starscape.
Yeah.
And I would love to see an idea like that done like in a modern way.
Yeah.
Like it's just such an interesting concept, like this one, like a similar setting to DS9, but in a much different way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just loved the vibe of that show, and it was great.
I'd like to see how it evolves on its own without competing in that world with DS9, which kind of overshadowed it in so many ways.
Yeah.
Including for me. I didn't give it enough of a chance.
Yeah.
So,
Well, the first season is definitely rough, and then
Right,
but it's very cool. PPS. What is one fantasy or sci-fi franchise that should be canceled if currently running, or stay dead if it's already run? All Game of Thrones stuff.
All Game of Thrones stuff. Yep.
I know there's a huge fan base for it out there, but I just
Don't get me wrong. I'm going to read that next book, and I'm probably going to read through all the books that came before, just like I do every time one comes out, except that it will probably never come out. But the TV shows, no, they have ruined that.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ugh. And PPPS. A casting agent wants you to play a background character in a fantasy or sci-fi TV episode that will be highly visible, but with no talking lines. Is it a fantasy or sci-fi show, and what type of background character are you? I'm an elf. Yep.
That's
It's a Lord of the Rings show, and I'm an elf.
That's a good choice.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mine would be a toss-up. I would either like to be a Togruta Jedi in a Star Wars show.
Oh, that would be good.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And or the other one, Kai Hubuk on Deep Space Nine Rebooted.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
I would like to be the Kai.
Yeah.
You could kill me off. I can be the Kai that's about to die for the real actor to come in. That's fine.
Yeah.
But please give me my Bajoran robes and nose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I would love to be like an Amazonian warrior.
Oh yeah.
In the background of like
right?
a good Wonder Woman.
A good
show.
one. Yeah.
Or any
Right.
like fable or version of the
Yeah.
Amazons. It's just badass always.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anything like that would be super cool. too.
Yeah. 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 Because I would also accept an X-Man. Just somebody in Xavier's school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's a fun question.
When I was getting my master's degree, like one of the things we had to do is we had to come up with like a pamphlet for our like school. We had to like come up with we did a big huge project where we like planned a school because it was in policy and administration for schools, and we had to come up with our school. We had to like come up with a population and like show how we were like communicating with all the family. All these, it was very interesting. But one of the things we had to do was make a brochure. So like low key, like I did my whole thing, and the whole time it was school for gifted youngsters.
Oh yeah.
It was all X-Men, but it was just like nobody like knew it. So I did all these presentations, and it was like the end of my last presentation. And I'd finished, and we were leaving class, and like this guy like walks up to me who like we'd never talked like ever.
Yeah.
He's like, X-Men are super cool.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, they are. And we kind of like fist bumped, and then we just never spoke again. It was like the last class.
Right,
but
yeah.
like it was like a 2-year course. It was like so long. But like
very groovy mutation.
yeah, exactly. Like the whole time, like I'd just been doing all this X-Men stuff. Like it was real work, but And like I thought nobody had noticed. And like my
yeah.
teachers sure as heck didn't.
Yeah.
They're just, oh, that's amazing. Wow. They have the big X logo. It was like so ridiculous.
Oh, that's awesome.
So yeah, it was very funny.
Yeah, but you know that one person probably still tells the story
Probably.
of how this one person in my class like did a whole Xavier's school presentation and nobody got it except the two of us.
Yeah, it's very funny.
Yeah. And I won't name the property, but I was wearing a yellow and charcoal striped scarf after a movie had come out.
Yeah.
And I was walking through the airport, and there was this one like young woman who just like I was just passing by, and she just looks at me and she goes, "Love your scarf," and with this like meeting of the eyes that we knew, and it was like I feel like we're the only wizards in the entire airport, and we just noted each other.
Yeah.
Like we know.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, okay. Woo. Tangents. Okay.
Yeah.
So so universal GM training. I think this is it would be a hard one to do. But I think they're like core skills that I think are identifiable, and and all of them to different degree. Like it's kind of like they're like a bunch of core skills, and if you're weak in some of them, you can make up for it by being skilled in the others. And and most of them I think are trainable. Or they're either trainable or they're unnecessary. So like funny voices or just different voices. Like that's a great skill to have as a GM, and it's one of my favorite things to do as a GM, but it's also completely unnecessary. And I've had fantastic stories with GMs who do not modulate their voice at all. And so but I think there are these core skills like listening to your players, understanding pacing and character and story arcs, finding the things that you find enjoyable so that you make sure you're having a good time as the GM. I think those are the kinds of things that are really important to do or to have. And, everything else I think is kind of built on top of that stuff.
Yeah.
Like you can make up for not being really strong on the rules, especially if you have a player with you who is really strong on the rules and can guide you through it and likes it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to say no.
Yeah.
Like as someone who teaches kids things for a living,
Mm-hmm.
like everyone's like, oh, teach multiplication. Okay. I teach literally 4 or 5 different ways to do multiplication.
Yeah.
And different kids glom on to different ones that make sense. Like, partial products, or, regular algorithm that we're all taught, or some people like drawing it out. It's easier for them. Or, so there's all these different ways that you can do these basic skills.
Right.
So and that's one of the things we've discovered in education is like it used to be drill and kill. You did the multiplication until you learned how to do it. And some people just never were able to learn to do it.
Yeah.
And it was just, oh, they're not smart enough. They're failures.
Right.
And what we've discovered is no, there's just a lot of different ways the brain works.
Yeah.
And your version of multiplication might look differently than my multiplication, but we both get the same answer,
Right.
so it's correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
And division is a great example of this because I have a lot of students who come from Armenia and Russia and different countries in that area, and they, the way they set up division is completely different than how we set up division in this country. And even I teach multiple ways. I do partial quotient, we do long division, we do area model, we do all these different ways of division here too. So it's like, in my classroom at any one time, everyone's doing division, and you look around and there's like 5 different ways of doing it.
Yeah.
So, and every kid has their way of doing it. And they all get the same answer, hopefully, usually.
Right. Yeah.
All the methods get the same answer.
Right. Yeah.
So
it
it's
can
just
all be used properly.
Exactly. And whatever works best for your brain. So I feel like there is no one way to teach GMing because everybody starts from a different place too.
Yeah.
If you have someone like Bria, when she came on our show, had never really jammed before.
Yeah.
Like she'd played a little bit of D&D and never played anything else.
Yeah.
And but she'd had years of like improv training and performing,
Yeah.
things like that. So she's starting with a very different place than someone who, has read all of Tolkien's work and wants to run a Lord of the Rings game.
Right? Yeah.
And it's like, but they've never done any performing.
Yeah.
So there's just like, everyone starts from a different place. So it's really hard to be like, these are the rules of GMing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I feel like there's some like core tenets that you could probably teach people.
Yeah.
But again, like there's going to be those people who remember all the rules really well.
Right.
I'm not one of those people.
Yeah.
So, running One Ring right now, which is very like rules heavy compared to many of the
Compared to a
systems
lot
I've
of
run.
stuff, yeah.
Yeah. Now that I've
Yeah.
run it a bit, it's becoming much more lightweight. And it's like, oh, okay, this is super easy now.
Yeah.
But, I was really nervous about it at first, especially doing it streaming, because I don't have a great memory for rules.
Yeah.
So I have a million cheat sheets that are all like very clearly labeled and highlighted in different colors. So
Uh-huh.
I'm like, oh, combat, grab the red one. Oh, okay, they're journeying, grab the green one,
Yeah.
So it's like all these different things, which makes sense in my head. But if someone else sat down and would be like, isn't it easier just to learn the rules?
It's like, not for me, no.
Well, I know the rules. So the minute I look down and I'm like, oh, okay, yes, I know exactly how this works. I
Yeah.
just need that little kick,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know.
I do a lot of, I'm sure I know this rule and I'm pretty sure I'm doing it right, but I just need to see to confirm.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, okay, I did know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny hearing you talk about math because I grew up with the old school, and drill and kill. Yeah. And when I started hearing about all the like quote unquote new math,
Common Core.
Common Core, yeah, Common Core.
We ruined
Right.
math.
Ruined math, and I'm like, really? What is it that everybody's so upset about Common Core? And I looked at it and I'm like, oh my God, that's what I've always done in my head.
Yeah.
That helped me internalize all of this stuff. Like, yeah, I memorized it, but the way I pictured it in my brain was the same system as Common Core, but I just had to translate that for myself, and because I'm a visual learner, so I see it in my brain. And my dad, and I always joke because my dad and I had very different ways of learning. My dad was a mechanical learner, and he told the story about how when he got his first car, he took the engine apart and put it back together from memory.
Yeah.
And that sounds like one of those like up the hill both ways kind of stories, but I actually believe it about my dad.
Yeah.
He was just that very kind of like probably borderline autism spectrum, and definitely had a lot of neurodivergence. And I believe he really did, like, he would see things and he would just take them apart, and he knew exactly how and why they all functioned. And and he's like, when I turned 16, he got me a 1963 Chevy Impala, what he called, quote, a good GM car that I can work on myself. And I'm like, oh, you don't know me, Dad. You haven't learned nothing in 60 years. And he started trying to teach me how to work on it. And, and he's like, okay, well, here's the carburetor and here's how you take it out. And I'm like, well, what does it do? Like, well, it just does its carburetor. It just does what it's supposed to do. And here's how you take it out. I'm like, no, I need to know why.
Yeah.
I have to learn how internal combustion works so that I can understand this car.
And why?
Yeah. And, and he just we could never connect on that. But if I know the reason behind a fact, or the reason behind a system, I absolutely can remember it very easily. But if somebody can't tell me why it works that way, I do not, I can never internalize it. So, but yeah, it's very, I think you're right in that there's so much variety in how people are going to learn how to GM and what they need to come up with, that it's hard to get beyond some just really broad, basic tenets.
Yeah, I think you could, and you even say it in the email. It's like, I feel like there is probably a somewhat universal approach to learning to DM Dungeons and Dragons of a certain edition.
Right.
Things like that. It's like, here's how you make sure your encounter is balanced.
Yeah.
And some basic skills like that you need to have. But that is not going to apply to something else. If you're playing Traveler, that might inform a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's a very different system. And if you're playing GURPS, it's going to be totally different.
Yeah.
Because GURPS is a totally different system, and all the
Right.
math for them is totally different. So while you might take from learning to DM, okay, the encounter has to be somewhat balanced.
Right.
Or maybe if your GMing style doesn't believe in that philosophy, maybe
Yeah.
no.
Right. Yeah.
You know, but like, so you can take like ideas
Yeah.
from system to system like that. But the math you do for one doesn't necessarily translate,
Right.
to another one either.
Yeah.
So, and like, I feel like there's a lot of like systems that like you can do that a lot. PBTA is one where there's like a very traditional set of MC like agendas and guidelines and things like that every PBTA hack has and specifically lays out.
Yeah.
So once you learn what those mean, it's pretty easy to pick up another one.
Yeah.
Which is a cool design. I don't know if it was designed that way on purpose, but it was a kind of a good side effect of how it was designed.
Yeah.
And kind of the same thing if you like Dungeons and Dragons, like once you learn how to run Dungeons and Dragons, you can pick up all their different spelljammers going to be the same way.
Yeah.
And you know, all the Citadel, all these different things, you can grab them and run them right away because they use the same skills.
Yeah. And I would also argue that that Dungeons and if you learn how to GM or play Dungeons and Dragons, you can also pretty easily pick up most of the more traditional games like Pathfinder or even I would say something like Savage Worlds, which just have they build on a lot of the same structure, you know, in terms of how you put things together and how you structure a story and you know, things like the character class concept. You know, you have your character class and your species and your, you know, and these things combine to create your unique situation.
Yeah.
And
combat has an initiative order, and you you go around the table, and everybody does their thing, and then you do the next thing.
You roll attack, you roll damage, you declare a response action. You know, those are some pretty common things that go across a lot of different games like that. GURPS is another one. But like. You know, and I feel like a lot of the PBTA games are kind of that same way. There's some differences, and you've got to learn some new mechanics like strings and monster hearts or influence and masks. But ultimately, it's pretty much the same thing. You roll 2d6, you add or subtract a number, and the range tells you what the general reaction to your action is going to be. Right.
And a lot of that, like Blades in the Dark. So there's like these, once you get the main one down, you can pick up and grab the other ones fairly easily.
Yeah.
But they all have a little bit different things.
Yeah.
While there are definitely specific things that transfer, they all also have things that are very unique to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in a lot of ways it's goals. You know, what is the goal of the story? What kind of story is this system designed to tell? And you know, I think where I think GMs have a lot of problems switching systems is when they're trying to tell a story in a system that is not designed for it.
Yeah.
You know, like if you try to do a dungeon crawl with like Starscape, you know, it's not gonna go right.
It's not gonna go well.
Yeah, it's just gonna be weird.
Yeah, I mean, it'll do it.
Right, yeah.
Why?
Yeah, exactly. In the same way that, like, yes, you could play, like, a modern day romance drama in Dungeons and Dragons, but why would you do that to yourself?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
You know, but I think a lot of this comes from the fact that gaming is still so very new as a hobby in a lot of ways, and there's still a lot that is undefined and unsystemized. And so I think people are looking for ways to systemize it, you know, and but I don't think you need that.
Yeah.
I think you should. You can focus on those sort of core principles of listening to each other, trying to get a sense of the pacing of the story and guiding that together, and treating each other fairly in terms of, you know, like the consistency of the rules, you know, so that people don't feel like it's just arbitrary.
Yeah, I do think you did key onto an actual universal thing though, like thing that you can say to GMs. I think having a GM play or GM enough
Yeah.
games that they learn what type of game they like to play.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's a really core universal truth for all GMs.
Yeah.
It's like figure out where your fun is,
Yeah.
because then you're able to find games or run games that make that the
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
So I feel like a lot of and that's something that takes a while.
Yeah.
The first time I sat down to a game, it was like, oh, this is a game where you sit and you roll dice and you kill things. This is how this works, right? And now I run games and write games that aren't that at all.
Right.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you could. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you can shoot. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
That's not the
right.
important part. How are you feeling?
Right.
Where's the drama here? Like,
yeah, exactly.
yeah. So I think that would be a good universal place to start. Is like really reflect on, hey,
Yeah.
there's all these systems that can do anything.
Yeah.
What adventure do you want to have?
Yeah.
know?
Exactly.
So, and I
Yeah.
think that would be a good crystallization of one good starting place for all GMs, no
GMs.
matter what system they're running, no matter what their background is,
Yeah.
whatever it is, like really like find out what story you want to tell or create, because you're not just telling it, because
Right.
that's not
Yeah.
jamming.
Yeah.
You know, to find out what adventure you want to have,
Yeah.
and then go from there.
Yeah. Yeah. And the next step is communicate that clearly to your players, to the players, because if you're not on the same page on that, you end up with some really unhappy people on all sides.
Absolutely.
So, but yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah.
Mailbag
number 3.
I feel like this is going to be a good segue from that. So,
Okay.
hey, Captain Kimmy and the crew of the merry ship Happy Jacks. It's Rose back at you again with another email.
Woohoo!
I, like a lot of the listening audience and a majority of the hosts, have collected too many RPG books, PDFs, and sundry materials over the years.
Yeah.
The problem is, people keep making cool games, and your girl only has so many hours in the day to play, run, or salivate over them. So here's my question. What is your RPG white whale? What's the system that you've always looked at and gone, damn, I really want to run or play that, but never had the chance, either because of lack of a group or because the time investment to learn that particular system is just too high? My RPG white whale will always be the Dresden Files RPG. Its source books wonderfully flesh out Jim Butcher's urban fantasy setting, and its mechanics make my eyes glaze over. It's given me so many ideas for campaigns that I have just never, ever come close to actually running. Until next time, drink.
Huzzah! Well, this one's gonna... Since you invited me to this game very recently, and I had to turn it down for time purposes.
Yeah.
Like Mage.
Yeah.
Mage is like my white whale. I've never played it.
Yeah.
I have a bunch of the books. Like, I love World of Darkness systems. I've played a bunch of like different vampire ones, Masquerade, 5e, all that. And I've never gotten to play Mage. And I've always wanted to play Mage, especially since we had a cool Mage in our big campaign with Stu. And I was always like, oh, there's a whole system with like all these cool mages. That's amazing. And I've never gotten to play.
Yeah. It's really cool, and honestly, the more you file the numbers off for me, the more cool it is. The concept behind the system is great, and I love the World of Darkness system, and it's about as crunchy as I like to get anymore. But the crunch in World of Darkness makes sense to me.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of it's just unnecessary. But I also I load up people with all kinds of boosts and stuff and free dots and things and because I just find like White Wolf as is great if you're going to be playing a long campaign. But if you're keeping it short, like nobody has the patience to like get boosted up to where you really want to be.
Yeah,
So
it's made to be like long form campaign.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, Mage is a great one, and I've played it a few times and always really enjoyed it. This is the first time I've run it, and I've actually really enjoyed running it, and kind of found my stride in it. But it takes a lot of hand waving, But I also told the players like, I'm not in this for the mechanics. I have a cool setting idea that I think would be fun to play in, and a very vague idea of a starter plot, a pilot plot, and and I'm like, I want to explore how you do your magic and what that looks like and how that influences your interactions with the world. I'm not concerned with like crunching the numbers on did you do it or not.
Yeah.
But yeah, Mage is a great one. I think it's one that a lot of people would like to play. But it's very dense if you don't know what to ignore.
Yeah.
So and mine, funnily enough, is also World of Darkness, but
No.
it's Changeling. I've
You've
never
only-
been able to play it. I've only
Oh.
run it. And when I first ran it for my college group way back when it came out, I was like, okay, if I run it and everybody sees how cool it is, somebody will run it for me so I get to play it finally. I've never been able to do that. So
Oh no.
yeah, so I would love to play in a Changeling campaign.
Mhm.
But yeah. Yeah, I'd also really like to play in a werewolf campaign that was really serious. I've only been in campaigns with werewolves who were when it was mixed with others, you know, or I was in like campaigns that ended up only being like 1 or 2 sessions and then fizzled and things like that.
That's hard.
Yeah. But and then there's so and then my runner-ups are the Expanse RPG. And it doesn't seem to be all that great in terms of mechanics.
Yeah, I
but-
was really excited, and I have it.
Yeah,
but I
yeah,
was like, "Oh, this is gonna
Yep.
be great! I'm so excited! I'm into these
Yep.
books, and I love this show." And I,
Yep.
oh,
Oh, yeah.
oh.
Yeah. It's, yeah. Which really makes me sad.
Yeah,
So,
there's some really cool things in it, but
Yeah.
I've learned this because the One Ring, I read through it and I was like,
Uh-huh.
oh my gosh, this is wild. This is crunchy. This is awful.
Yeah.
But like reading through it, it plays so much better than it reads.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
Like I was just like, oh my gosh, these combats are gonna be terrible.
Right.
But then like doing the combats after, like really looking at it and seeing it in action, it's a lot
Yeah.
better. So maybe The Expanse plays
It
a
could
lot
be.
better than it read.
Yeah. Yeah. If
But
anybody out there has played it, please let us
I
know.
heard
Yeah.
not so great things about
Yeah.
it, but again, like I
Yeah.
can't give specific citation
Yeah.
to us
What-
playing it or trying it.
Yeah.
So.
One of my favorite Happy Jacks moments was we did a one-shot of it. I think it was for one of the Rainbow Railroad
Oh, yeah,
charities,
yeah.
and Jib ran it. And Jib was like the only other person who could just like sort of improv Belter speech. And so he and I were just like having a whole conversation in Belta, and it was just like, this is so cool. I want this all the time. But yeah, and then the other one, my newest one, is Coyote and Crow, which is beautiful, and it's just the most amazing setting. I'm just so excited just reading through the setting materials, and I'm just like, I want to play in this world so much, but I just feel like I don't know that well, it's one of those things where I'm concerned that a lot of my friends are going to feel too like it's too risky, you know, because so many of my friends are very conscientious about native stereotypes, and not because they, not just because I'm around, but because they're good people. So, but especially like, I know for a fact that, the fear of exploring a game like this that is so centered very heavily on, on a specific racial identity, can feel very dangerous eggshells, shells. And so I'm kind of worried that I'm never really going to find anybody who will want to run it for me. And I don't want to run it with strangers because I don't know if they're going to actually be cool or not.
Yeah.
So,
Jason was
yeah.
actually interested in running that.
He was, yeah. So, yeah.
Because they do that whole thing
Yeah.
where they actually set up, and I know we've talked about this before, like, if you are not indigenous,
Yeah.
this is how you run this game.
Yeah, yeah.
There's very specific laid out. It gives you very specific, you have permission to run this game.
Yes, yeah.
And the interesting thing about it is a lot of it is completely fictional.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they,
yeah.
They've come up with a world where colonization didn't happen here.
Yeah.
And so it's like, this is all fictional. You can
Right.
play in this part of it because we have made all of this up.
Yeah.
If you are actually Indigenous and you want to bring your own culture into it, you can. That's great.
Right.
If you're not, don't do that.
Don't do that. Yeah.
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 But, but feel free to play with all of this, all these toys we gave you.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I think that was a really great, smart design choice.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it'd be similar to saying like, hey, it's one thing to play a Wakandan character if you're, if you're not Black, but it's a whole different thing to like try and play a Ghanaian character or, or an Egyptian character or, or a Congolese character. That's a very different thing, and you maybe kind of want to like not do that.
Maybe no.
Yeah, right. So
just not even maybe, just no.
Exactly, just no. That's very much in the same vein as like if you're a man playing a female character, don't play a slutty character. You're not doing what you think you're doing, even if you have the best of intentions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But
right.
So there's about
Those are white whales.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
I was just gonna shout out the ones that were listed in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody said Numenera, which that's another one which like beautiful and really cool story. But I found it was interesting. I got to play in a very short campaign of it.
Oh.
It's interesting. It's got a lot of layers in a really good setting, but it's kind of very dense and very vague at the same time. It was really weird. Not to knock it or but yeah, and then somebody also mentioned Under Hollow Hills. It's a PBTA game where you play members of a Fae circus, which is I've also heard really cool things about and haven't been able to play yet.
Cool, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is it. Thank you for joining us for season 31, episode 8 of the Happy Jacks RPG podcast. My name is Kimmy.
My name is Adam.
And thank you again for... got distracted. Please visit monkeyspawgames.com and support our amazing indie designer of the month, Newer Rose, and all her fantastic games. Thank you to our chat mod, James V, and to our amazing Patreons who keep us ad-free and independent. You can join their amazing ranks at happyjacks.org/Patreon. As a Patreon, you also get free games every month from our indie designer of the month. And today we are going to leave you with a song. We're going to leave you with the Gloucestershire Wassail, or Wassail for us in America. Wassail is what they say, and over the pond, as it were. Yes.
Oh.
So they pronounce it differently. Everyone pronounces Gloucestershire the same way, even though it's like Gloucestershire.
Right.
And
Gloucestershire.
Yes. So in the holiday spirit, we're leaving you with a version of the Gloucestershire Wassail, sung by the Merry Wives of Windsor. If you listen very closely, I'm in there, and it's one of my favorite Christmas songs. It's very fun.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So thank you all, and we will see you all next week. Bye.
Right. Bye.
Wassail, wassail all over the town. Our toast it is white and our ale it is brown. Our bowl it is made of the white maple tree. With a wassailing bowl we'll drink to thee.
And here is to Dobbin and to his rider, hard-work nuts and the master of good Christmas pie, that may we all see.
With a wassailing bowl we'll drink to thee. And here is to Broadway and to her Broadhorn, make us and our master a good crop of corn, and a good crop of corn that may we all see. With come fill us a bowl of the best, and we hope that your soul in heaven may rest. But if you do draw us a bowl of the small, then down shall go